My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm 29 years old. 3 months ago, I inherited $3.2 million from my great-aunt Eleanor, a woman I barely knew, but who apparently saw something in me that the rest of my family missed. What happened next taught me everything I needed to know about the people I call family. Before I tell you about the test I conducted and its shocking results, let me paint a picture of my life before everything changed. I was working as a junior software developer at a mid-sized tech company in Austin, Texas, making $65,000 a year. Not terrible money, but not enough to feel truly secure in a city where rent was skyrocketing and everyone seemed to be making six figures in tech. I lived in a cramped studio apartment in East Austin, the kind of place where the air conditioning barely worked in summer and the heating was questionable in winter. My daily routine was monotonous. Wake up at 7 a.m., grab coffee from the bodega downstairs because I couldn't afford a decent coffee maker, commute 45 minutes to work, code for 9 hours, commute home, eat instant ramen or whatever was on sale at the grocery store, and fall asleep watching Netflix on my aging laptop. My family situation was complicated. My parents, David and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan when I was 5. They owned a small restaurant in Houston called Golden Dragon, which sounds more successful than it actually was. The restaurant barely broke even most months, and my parents worked 14-hour days just to keep it afloat. They had big dreams for their children, the typical immigrant parent expectations of doctor, lawyer, or engineer. My choice to study computer science was acceptable, but my current salary was a constant source of disappointment. My older sister, Angela, 32, had fulfilled their dreams by becoming a pediatrician. She was married to another doctor, Robert, and they lived in a beautiful house in West Houston with their twin daughters, Emma and Sophie. Angela had always been the golden child, and she never let me forget it. Despite making well over $300,000 combined household income, she was constantly stressed about money, always talking about the cost of private school, saving for college, and maintaining their lifestyle. My younger brother, Kevin, 26, was the family disappointment. He had dropped out of college twice, bounced between jobs, and had racked up significant credit card debt. Kevin lived with our parents, ostensibly to help with the restaurant, but mainly because he couldn't afford to live anywhere else. He was charming and charismatic, the kind of person who could talk his way into anything, but he had never learned to follow through on his commitments. The extended family was equally complex. My uncle James, my father's older brother, had found success as a real estate agent and owned several rental properties. He lived in a McMansion in the suburbs with his wife Carol and their son Michael, my cousin who was currently attending UT on his parents' dime, studying business and partying his way through college without a care in the world. My Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister, was a single mom, raising 2 teenagers while working as a nurse at Texas Children's Hospital. She had been through a messy divorce 3 years earlier and was still struggling financially, but she never complained and always found ways to help others despite her own challenges. Then there was my grandmother, Nai Nai, who lived in a senior community in Chinatown. At 84, she was sharp as ever, but survived on Social Security and whatever small amounts the family could contribute to her care. She had been the one who stayed closest to Great-Aunt Eleanor, visiting her in the nursing home when no one else bothered. Great-Aunt Eleanor was my grandfather's sister, a woman who had never married and had worked as a librarian for 40 years. She lived frugally, saved religiously, and invested wisely. Most of the family considered her eccentric and antisocial. She rarely attended family gatherings, and when she did, she sat quietly in the corner, observing rather than participating. I had maybe 10 conversations with her in my entire life, usually brief exchanges at holiday dinners. What I remember most about Great-Aunt Eleanor was that she actually listened when people talked. While everyone else was focused on their own drama, she would ask thoughtful questions and remember details from previous conversations. She was the only family member who had ever asked about my actual work, not just how much money I was making. She seemed genuinely interested in the apps I was developing and the technical challenges I faced. My financial history with my family was a pattern of one-sided generosity that I was too young and naive to recognize at the time. When Kevin needed money for community college, I used my entire summer job savings, $2,800, to help pay for his tuition. He dropped out after 1 semester. When my parents needed help with restaurant equipment repairs, I put $3,500 on my credit card, money I couldn't really afford. When Angela needed a loan for her medical school residency moving expenses, I emptied my emergency fund to give her $4,000, which she promised to pay back once she was earning doctor money. 3 years later, I was still waiting. The pattern was always the same. Crisis, plea for help, emotional manipulation about family loyalty, my financial sacrifice, temporary gratitude, then radio silence until the next crisis. I justified it by telling myself that family comes first, that someday it would come back around, that I was investing in relationships that mattered. My only real friend during this time was Tyler. my college roommate who had stayed in Austin after graduation. Tyler worked as a graphic designer and understood the struggle of being underpaid in an expensive city. He was the only person who ever called out my family's behavior, pointing out how they took advantage of my generosity without reciprocating when I needed help. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was debugging a particularly frustrating piece of code when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Houston area code. "Is this Marcus Chen?" asked a professional-sounding woman. "Yes, this is Marcus. My name is Patricia Williams, and I'm an attorney with Williams & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Eleanor Chen. I understand she was your great-aunt?" My heart skipped a beat. Yes, she was. Has something happened? "I'm sorry to inform you that Miss Chen passed away last week. She had been in hospice care for several months. The funeral was yesterday." I was stunned. No one in the family had told me that great-aunt Eleanor was sick, let alone dying. The fact that her funeral had already happened without my knowledge was both shocking and sadly typical of how information flowed in our family. "I'm calling because you are named as the primary beneficiary in Miss Chen's will. Could you come to my office this week to discuss the inheritance?" I agreed to meet her the following Friday, assuming I would be inheriting some books, maybe a small savings account, perhaps enough to pay off my credit card debt. I requested the day off work and drove to Houston, preparing myself for an afternoon of paperwork and legal formalities. Patricia Williams' office was in a gleaming downtown high-rise, far more upscale than I had expected for handling the estate of a retired librarian. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her desk. "First, let me express my condolences. Your great-aunt spoke of you often in our meetings." "She did?" I was surprised. I couldn't imagine what she would have had to say about me. "Oh yes, she kept track of your career progress, was very proud of the applications you developed. She showed me articles about your company's software releases where you were mentioned." This was news to me. I had no idea great-aunt Eleanor had been following my work. She was also quite observant about family dynamics, Patricia continued. She spent considerable time thinking about how to structure her estate in a way that would have the most positive impact. She opened a folder and pulled out several documents. "Miss Chen was quite wealthy, Marcus. More wealthy than anyone in your family realized. Through careful saving and smart investments over 40 years, she accumulated substantial assets." I nodded, still expecting modest amounts. "You are inheriting $3.2 million. The words didn't compute at first. I heard them, but my brain refused to process what they meant. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" $3.2 million. The bulk of her estate, including her investment portfolio, savings accounts, and the proceeds from the sale of her home. I stared at her, mouth open, completely unable to respond. Patricia smiled gently. "I know it's a shock. Your great-aunt left specific instructions for me to explain her reasoning. May I read you the letter she wrote?" I nodded, still speechless. Patricia opened another document and began reading in Eleanor's own words. "Marcus, if you are hearing this, it means I have passed on and you are learning about this inheritance. I chose you not because you are my closest relative. We both know that's not true. But because in my observations over the years, you are the only family member who gives without keeping score and works without expecting praise. I watched you help your brother with college tuition money you had saved for months. I saw you sacrifice your emergency fund to help your parents' business. I noticed that when your sister needed moving money, you didn't hesitate to help, even though you were struggling yourself. But more importantly, I watched how the family treats you. You give generously and are taken for granted. You work hard and are criticized for not making enough money. You show up for everyone else, but when you need support, you face it alone. I hope this money will give you the freedom to make choices based on what you want rather than what you can afford. But I also hope you will be wise about who you share this news with. Money has a way of revealing people's true characters, and not always in pleasant ways. Use this gift to build the life you want, help causes you believe in, and surround yourself with people who value you for who you are, not what you can give them. You deserve better than you've been receiving. With love and respect, Great-Aunt Eleanor." By the time Patricia finished reading, I had tears in my eyes. This woman who I barely knew had seen me more clearly than people I'd lived with my entire life. The next 2 hours were a blur of legal documents, tax implications, and financial planning advice. Patricia connected me with a wealth management firm and recommended a tax attorney. By the time I left her office, I had access to more money than I had ever imagined possessing. The drive back to Austin gave me time to process what had happened. I was a millionaire. I could quit my job, buy a house, travel the world, do whatever I wanted. But Eleanor's letter kept echoing in my mind, particularly her warning about money revealing people's true characters. Over the next week, I made some immediate practical changes. I paid off my credit card debt, put a security deposit on a much better apartment, and bought a reliable used car to replace my 12-year-old Honda that was held together with prayer and duct tape. But I was careful to make changes that could be explained by a promotion or bonus at work. The inheritance was structured in a way that gave me monthly access to investment income while preserving the principal. Patricia had explained that this setup would provide me with approximately $15,000 per month in income while allowing the principal to grow over time. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of having. But Eleanor's warning haunted me. I started thinking about my family's reaction if they knew about the money. Would they suddenly become interested in my life? Would they expect me to solve all their financial problems? Would their treatment of me change? And if so, would it be genuine or motivated by greed? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed to know who my family really was before I decided what to do with this information. I began formulating a plan that would reveal their true characters without them knowing about the inheritance. I decided to conduct an experiment similar to what I had done unconsciously for years, but this time deliberately and with clear observation. I would approach each family member with a request for help, not a huge amount, but enough to be meaningful, and see how they responded when they thought I had nothing to offer in return. The amount I settled on was $2,500. It was significant enough to require thought and sacrifice, but not so large as to be impossible for most of my family members. I crafted a story about needing money for an emergency medical procedure, specifically a diagnostic test for persistent headaches that my insurance wouldn't fully cover. The story was believable, urgent enough to justify asking for help, but not so dramatic as to cause panic. I made a list of everyone I would approach: my parents, Angela and Robert, Kevin, Uncle James and Aunt Carol, Aunt Susan, and my cousin Michael. I also planned to approach Nai, though I expected her to have limited resources to help. Before beginning the experiment, I called Tyler to discuss my plan. I couldn't tell him about the inheritance. Eleanor's warnings about secrecy felt too important to ignore, but I could talk through the family dynamics. "Dude, why are you setting yourself up for disappointment?" Tyler asked when I explained my intention to ask family members for money. "You know they're not going to help you." "But what if they do? What if I've been unfair in my assessment of them?" "Marcus, you've been giving them money for years and getting nothing back. What makes you think this time will be different?" "Maybe they didn't realize I needed help before. Maybe if I asked directly." Tyler sighed. "Look, I hope I'm wrong, but I think you're about to get a very painful education about your family. Just promise me you won't let this destroy you when they inevitably let you down." I promised, though I secretly hoped he was wrong. I decided to start with my parents, reasoning that they would be most likely to help their son in a medical crisis. I drove to Houston on a Saturday afternoon, timing my visit to arrive during the restaurant's slow period between lunch and dinner service. Golden Dragon looked exactly as it had my entire life: worn red vinyl booths, faded gold wallpaper, and the persistent smell of cooking oil that never quite left the air. My parents were in the kitchen preparing for the dinner rush, my mother chopping vegetables while my father worked on a large pot of soup. "Marcus," my mother exclaimed when she saw me. "What brings you home? You should have called. We could have prepared something special." "I actually need to talk to you both about something important," I said, noting how my father's expression immediately became guarded. We sat in one of the booths while I explained my situation. I told them about the persistent headaches that had been getting worse, the expensive diagnostic tests my doctor recommended, and the gap between what insurance would cover and what I needed to pay. "It's $2,500 for the full workup," I explained. "I've already scheduled the appointment, but I need to pay up front. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." My parents exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. "How much does your insurance cover?" my father asked. "About half. I can cover some of it myself, but I'm short $2,500. Another long pause. "Marcus," my mother began carefully, "you know the restaurant is struggling. We barely made payroll last month. The new minimum wage increase has really hurt our profit margins." "And Kevin is still living with us," my father added. "We're helping him get back on his feet, covering his car insurance and phone bill. Plus, Nai's care costs keep going up." "I understand the restaurant is tight," I said. "But this is my health we're talking about. I wouldn't ask if I had other options." "Have you talked to Angela?" my mother suggested. "She's a doctor. She might know of other resources, or maybe she and Robert could help since they have more stable income." I noticed they didn't offer any amount, not even a smaller sum to help partially. They immediately looked for ways to redirect the request to someone else. "Maybe you could get a second opinion on whether you really need all those tests," my father suggested. "Doctors sometimes order unnecessary procedures." "Or see if the hospital has payment plans," my mother added. "Most places will work with you if you explain the situation." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my parents offering advice, suggestions, and alternatives to actually helping me financially. When I finally left, they had not offered a single dollar, despite the fact that I knew they had recently spent $3,000 on new restaurant equipment. My next stop was Angela and Robert's house in West Houston. Their neighborhood was the kind of place where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. I called ahead to make sure they would be home, telling Angela I needed to discuss something important. Their house was exactly what you'd expect from two doctors. Expensive furniture, professional family photos, children's artwork displayed in expensive frames. Emma and Sophie, now 8 years old, were playing in the backyard while Angela and Robert sat with me in their living room. I told them the same story about the headaches and the medical tests, emphasizing the urgency of getting the diagnosis. That does sound concerning, Angela said, her medical training kicking in. Which neurologist are you seeing? Have they ruled out migraines or tension headaches? We discussed the medical aspects for several minutes, with Angela offering professional insight and asking detailed questions about my symptoms. But when I mentioned needing $2,500 for the tests, the conversation shifted dramatically. That's a lot of money, Marcus, Robert said. Have you looked into getting a medical loan? There are companies that specialize in healthcare financing. Our finances are pretty tight right now, Angela added. The girls' piano lessons, gymnastics, and tutoring add up quickly. Plus, we're trying to save for their college funds. And our mortgage is substantial, Robert continued. We're house poor, as they say. Most of our income goes to maintaining this lifestyle. I was amazed by the irony. Here were two people making over $300,000 per year, talking about being financially constrained while sitting in their $600,000 house, discussing their children's expensive extracurricular activities. I understand money is tight for everyone, I said, but we're talking about a diagnostic test that could reveal something serious. Isn't family supposed to help each other in situations like this? Of course family helps each other, Angela said quickly. But we also have to be responsible about our financial commitments. Have you talked to Mom and Dad? Or Uncle James? He's always done well with his real estate business. Once again, I was being redirected to other family members rather than receiving actual help. The conversation ended with promises to think about it and suggestions to explore other options, but no concrete offer of assistance. My visit to Uncle James and Aunt Carol yielded similar results. They lived in an even larger house than Angela, drove luxury cars, and had recently returned from a European vacation. When I explained my situation, they listened with apparent concern, but quickly began explaining why they couldn't help. Real estate is cyclical, Marcus, Uncle James said. We might look successful, but most of our wealth is tied up in properties. Our liquid cash is limited. And Michael's college expenses are enormous, Aunt Carol added. We're paying full tuition at UT plus his apartment, car, and spending money. It's like having another mortgage payment. They did offer to help me research medical financing options and even suggested I might qualify for hospital charity care, despite knowing I had a full-time job with insurance. Kevin's response was perhaps the most predictable, but still disappointing. When I approached him privately during a family dinner at my parents' restaurant, he listened to my story with what seemed like genuine concern. Man, that sucks, he said. Headaches can be really serious. You definitely need to get that checked out. But when I asked if he could help with the costs, his demeanor changed completely. Dude, you know I'm broke. I'm living with Mom and Dad and can barely afford gas for my car. I've got my own medical bills from that emergency room visit last month. I'm not asking for the full amount, I said. Even a couple $100s would help. I literally have like $50 in my checking account, he insisted. Ask Angela or Uncle James. They actually have money. The irony was stark. Kevin, who had borrowed thousands from me over the years, couldn't spare even a small amount to help with what I had described as a potentially serious medical issue. Aunt Susan's response was different and heartbreaking in its own way. When I called to explain my situation, she immediately expressed concern and asked detailed questions about my symptoms and the proposed tests. Oh, Marcus, that must be so scary, she said. When can you get the tests done? When I explained the financial situation, there was a long pause. I wish I could help you, sweetie. I really do. But things are so tight right now with Sarah needing a retainer and Jake's sports equipment for high school. I'm barely keeping my head above water as it is. Her voice cracked slightly as she continued. I hate that I can't help you when you need it. Maybe if you could wait a month or two, I might be able to scrape together a few $100s. Unlike the others, Susan's inability to help seemed genuinely painful for her. She wasn't making excuses or suggesting alternatives. She was simply stating the reality of her financial situation while expressing real regret about it. My conversation with Nai Nai was conducted in a mixture of English and Mandarin, languages that reflected the generational and cultural gaps in our family. When I explained my health concerns, she became very upset. Head pain, very serious, Marcus. You must take care of this right away. When I mentioned the money needed for tests, she became even more agitated. I give you everything I have, she said firmly. How much you need? Nai, you don't need to. No. Family help family. This your health. Nothing more important. She insisted on writing me a check for $800, which I knew represented a significant portion of her monthly Social Security income. When I protested that it was too much, she became almost angry. You think I care about money more than grandson's health? You take this money right now. I was overwhelmed by her generosity, especially knowing how little she had to give. Here was an 84-year-old woman living on a fixed income, offering everything she could spare because she believed her grandson needed medical care. The final person I approached was my cousin Michael, mainly to complete the experiment rather than with any real expectation of help. Michael was a 20-year-old college student whose biggest financial concern was whether his parents would increase his monthly allowance. When I explained my situation during a brief meeting at a coffee shop near UT, his response was exactly what I expected. Wow, that sounds really stressful, he said, not looking up from his phone. But I'm just a college student, you know? I don't have that kind of money. Maybe ask my parents or your sister? They're the ones with real jobs. He then proceeded to order a $8 specialty drink and casually mentioned his plans to go skiing in Colorado the following month, paid for by his parents. After completing my rounds with the family, I had received exactly $800 from the one person who could least afford to give it, along with a collection of excuses, redirections, and suggestions from everyone else. The contrast was stark and painful. The people with the most money, Angela and Robert with their combined doctor salaries, Uncle James with his real estate success, even my parents with their small but stable business, had offered nothing. They had all found reasons why they couldn't help, despite having disposable income for vacations, luxury items, and expensive lifestyle choices. Meanwhile, Nai, living on less than $1,200 per month, had insisted on giving me over half of her monthly income because she believed I needed medical care. I spent that evening sitting in my small apartment, staring at Nai's check, and feeling a mixture of gratitude, anger, and profound sadness. The experiment had revealed exactly what Tyler had predicted, but seeing it laid out so clearly was still shocking. The next day, I called Nai to tell her that I had found other resources for the medical tests and tried to return her money. She refused to take it back. You keep this money, Marcus. Use for doctor or something else you need. I give because I love you, not because I want back. Her simple statement hit me harder than all the rejections from my other family members. Here was someone who gave without conditions, without expectations, without keeping score. That weekend, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to tell Nai about the inheritance, but I wasn't going to tell anyone else. At least not yet. She deserved to know that her grandson was secure, and she deserved to benefit from the wealth that great-aunt Eleanor had left behind. I drove to Houston and asked Nai if we could have a private conversation. In her small apartment filled with family photos and the smell of incense, I told her about great-aunt Eleanor's death and the inheritance she had left me. Nai listened quietly as I explained about the $3.2 million, occasionally asking questions to make sure she understood the amounts correctly. Eleanor, always smart woman, she said finally. I knew she saved money, but this much. She shook her head in amazement. I wanted you to know because you've been the only person who really tried to help me, I continued. And I want to make sure you're taken care of. Marcus, you good boy, but I no need money. I have enough. Nai, you just gave me most of your monthly income because you thought I needed medical care. You live in this tiny apartment and worry about grocery costs. Please let me help you. After much discussion and gentle persuasion, Nai agreed to let me help her move to a nicer senior living community with better medical care and more activities. She also agreed to let me set up an account that would ensure she never had to worry about money again. But you no tell family about money, she warned. This make big trouble. People change when they know about money. Her advice echoed great-aunt Eleanor's letter, and I promised to keep the inheritance secret for now. Over the next month, I helped Nai move to a beautiful senior community in a better part of town. She had her own apartment with a small kitchen, access to meals and activities, and excellent medical care. Watching her happiness in her new environment was worth every penny. I also decided to help Aunt Susan quietly. Through some research, I discovered she was struggling with credit card debt from her divorce and her children's expenses. I arranged for an anonymous payment of her outstanding balances and set up a small monthly stipend through a fake scholarship program I created for single mothers in healthcare. Susan never knew the money came from me, but I watched from a distance as the financial pressure in her life decreased. She was able to focus more on her children and less on juggling bills. For everyone else in the family, I maintained the status quo. I continued to attend family gatherings, listen to their complaints about money, and watch them make expensive purchases while claiming financial hardship. The contrast between their stated financial stress and their actual spending was now crystal clear to me. At a family barbecue 6 weeks after my experiment, I observed my relatives with new eyes. Angela complained about the cost of the girls' private school while wearing a new designer handbag. Uncle James discussed his cash flow problems while planning another vacation. My parents worried about restaurant expenses while Kevin sat nearby playing games on a new iPhone they had bought him. None of them asked about my health, despite my supposed need for expensive medical tests just weeks earlier. Their concern for my welfare had been superficial and temporary, forgotten as soon as they were no longer being asked for help. The most telling moment came when Kevin approached me privately during the barbecue. "Hey, whatever happened with those medical tests you needed money for?" he asked casually. "I managed to work something out," I replied vaguely. "Cool. Hey, listen, I'm thinking about going back to school, maybe getting a certificate in HVAC repair. There's a program that costs like $3,000. Think you could help me out?" I stared at him in disbelief. He was asking me for money again, just weeks after refusing to help me with what I had told him was a serious medical issue. "I don't think that's something I can help with right now, Kevin." "Come on, man, it's an investment in my future. I'd pay you back once I'm working in the field." The same promises, the same justifications, the same expectation that I would sacrifice for his benefit while he offered nothing in return. "I'll have to think about it," I said, knowing I would never agree to such a request again. That evening, Tyler and I met for dinner at our usual spot, a casual restaurant where we could talk freely. "You look different," Tyler observed. "More, I don't know, confident maybe?" I smiled. "I've learned some things about my family recently. You were right about them." "The money thing didn't go well?" "Exactly as you predicted. The only person who helped was my grandmother, who can't afford it. Everyone else had excuses." Tyler shook his head. "I'm sorry, man. That must have been painful to see so clearly." "It was, but also liberating in a way. I don't have to keep pretending that these relationships are balanced or healthy." "So what are you going to do?" "Focus on the people who actually care about me, like you and Nai. Let the others live their lives without expecting anything from them." Tyler raised his beer in a mock toast. "To clarity, even when it hurts." "To clarity," I agreed. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways that had nothing to do with spending money and everything to do with spending time with people who mattered. I had quit my job and started a nonprofit organization focused on providing technology education to seniors, inspired by watching Nai learn to video chat with her friends. The work was fulfilling in ways my corporate job had never been, and the flexible schedule allowed me to spend more time with the people I cared about. I had dinner with Nai twice a week, helped Tyler with freelance projects that paid well, and gradually built a social circle of people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My relationship with the rest of my family had shifted into something more honest, but distant. I still attended major gatherings, but I no longer felt obligated to solve their problems or meet their expectations. When Kevin asked for money for various schemes, I politely declined. When my parents hinted about restaurant expenses, I offered advice rather than cash. When Angela complained about the costs of her lifestyle, I listened without feeling responsible for fixing anything. Interestingly, none of them seemed particularly bothered by my reduced financial support. They simply found other sources or learned to live with their choices. This confirmed what I had suspected. My help had been convenient rather than essential, appreciated rather than valued. The most difficult conversation came when my mother confronted me about my changed behavior. "You seem different lately, Marcus, more distant, and you haven't been helping the family like you used to." "I'm just focusing on my own financial security for a while," I replied honestly. "But family helps family. That's how we've always done things." "I agree. But helping should go both ways, shouldn't it?" My mother looked uncomfortable. "What do you mean?" "When I needed help with medical expenses, no one in the family could spare even a small amount, but you all expect me to be available when you need help. That was different. We all have our own obligations, right? And now I have mine." The conversation ended awkwardly, but it established a new boundary that felt healthy and necessary. The only family member I told about the inheritance was Nai, and only after swearing her to secrecy. She was thrilled that Great-Aunt Eleanor had recognized my character and chosen to invest in my future. "Eleanor, see what I see," Nai said during one of our weekly dinners. "You have good heart, work hard, help people. Money just give you power to do more good." She was right. The inheritance had given me freedom. Not just financial freedom, but the freedom to choose how I spent my time and energy. I no longer had to accept one-sided relationships or feel guilty about setting boundaries. A year after receiving the inheritance, I received news that Great-Aunt Eleanor's will had included one final surprise. She had left detailed letters for several family members to be delivered on the first anniversary of her death. I was asked to distribute them. The letters were brief but pointed. To my parents, she wrote about the importance of supporting all their children equally. To Angela, she discussed the responsibility that comes with privilege. To Kevin, she offered wisdom about earning respect through actions rather than charm. But it was the letter to Uncle James that caused the biggest stir. Eleanor had apparently been aware of his financial success and had written pointedly about family members who had the means to help but chose not to. The letter included specific references to family members who had needed help and been ignored. The family gathering where I distributed these letters was tense and uncomfortable. Several people were clearly hurt by Eleanor's observations, and there were heated discussions about her right to judge their choices. "She barely knew us," Angela protested. "How could she understand our financial situations?" "Maybe she understood them better than you think," I replied quietly. Uncle James was particularly defensive. Easy for her to judge when she lived alone with no responsibilities. She didn't have kids to put through college or a business to maintain. "No," I agreed. "She just had a nephew who needed help with medical expenses and a family that talked about being too poor to help while spending money on vacations and luxury items." The room fell silent. Everyone knew I was referring to my recent request for help, but no one wanted to address it directly. That was the last large family gathering I attended. I realized that trying to maintain relationships with people who didn't value me was exhausting and pointless. Instead, I focused on building a chosen family of people who cared about each other genuinely. Tyler became like a brother to me, and through him, I met other friends who valued loyalty and mutual support. Nai introduced me to other seniors in her community, many of whom became like additional grandparents. My nonprofit work connected me with volunteers and staff who shared my values. The most important lesson I learned was that wealth's true value isn't in what you can buy, but in the freedom it gives you to choose your relationships and priorities. I could afford to walk away from toxic family dynamics because I didn't need their financial or emotional support to survive. 2 years after the inheritance, I was contacted by a journalist working on a story about lottery winners and inheritance recipients who had kept their windfalls secret. Somehow, word had gotten out about my situation, though I never discovered how. The journalist, Sarah Martinez, was writing a piece about the psychological and social impacts of sudden wealth. She had interviewed dozens of people who had come into large sums of money and was particularly interested in those who had chosen secrecy over disclosure. "Your case is unusual," she told me during our initial phone conversation. "Most people either tell everyone immediately or tell no one indefinitely. You told very few people, but still used the money to help certain family members. What drove those decisions?" I agreed to speak with her on the condition that my real name wouldn't be used and that specific details about my family would be changed to protect their privacy. Over several conversations, I found myself articulating lessons I was still learning. The money didn't change who anyone was, I explained to Sarah. It just revealed who they had always been. My grandmother was always generous, even when she had nothing to give. My brother was always looking for someone else to solve his problems. The inheritance just made these patterns more visible. "Do you regret conducting your experiment?" she asked. "No. It was painful, but it saved me years of continuing unhealthy patterns. I might have spent the rest of my life trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it genuinely." Sarah's article was published 6 months later in a national magazine. She had changed all the names and identifying details, but she captured the essence of my experience perfectly. The piece focused on the phenomenon of wealth testing, the practice of secretly coming into money and observing how people's behavior changes or doesn't change as a result. The article generated significant response from readers who shared similar experiences. Many people wrote about family members who disappeared when money was no longer flowing their way, or who suddenly reappeared when they suspected financial success. One letter particularly resonated with me. A woman named Jennifer wrote about inheriting a substantial sum from her uncle and deciding to give each family member $10,000, expecting gratitude and closer relationships. Instead, she received complaints that it wasn't enough, requests for more money, and resentment from relatives who felt others had been treated more generously. She ended up feeling more isolated than before she had shared her wealth. Another reader, David, wrote about winning a moderate lottery jackpot and telling his extended family, expecting celebration. Instead, he was bombarded with sob stories, business proposals, and guilt trips about family obligations. Within 2 years, he had given away most of his winnings and was filing for bankruptcy, while family members who had received his help avoided him. These stories reinforced my conviction that Eleanor's advice about secrecy had been wise. Money doesn't just reveal character, it can corrupt relationships that might otherwise remain stable, if limited. 3 years after the inheritance, I made a decision that surprised even me. I reached out to Kevin with a genuine offer to help him get his life together, but with strict conditions. "I'm willing to pay for you to attend a certified HVAC program," I told him during a coffee meeting. "But you have to complete the entire course, maintain passing grades, and commit to working in the field for at least 2 years after graduation." Kevin's eyes lit up with interest, but I could see him calculating whether he could manipulate the situation to his advantage. "What's the catch?" he asked. "No catch, but also no flexibility. If you drop out, fail classes, or quit working in the field early, you pay back every penny. And I won't give you any other financial help while you're in the program. You'll need to find a part-time job to support yourself." Why would you do this now when you wouldn't help before? I considered how much to tell him. Because before, you were asking me to enable your pattern of starting things and not finishing them. This time, I'm offering to invest in your success, but only if you're willing to do the work. Kevin agreed to the terms, though I could tell he wasn't entirely happy with the conditions. The program would take 18 months, and I made it clear that I would be monitoring his progress throughout. To my surprise, Kevin actually followed through. The structure and accountability seemed to be exactly what he needed. He completed the program with good grades, found a job with a reputable HVC company, and began building a career for the first time in his life. "I never realized how good it feels to actually finish something," he told me after his first year of work. "And having skills that people actually need, it's different from just talking my way through life." Kevin's success encouraged me to extend similar offers to other family members, always with clear conditions and expectations. I helped Angela's daughters with college savings accounts, but only with the requirement that Angela match my contributions dollar for dollar. I offered to help my parents modernize their restaurant, but only if they agreed to professional business counseling and updated financial management practices. Some family members accepted these conditional offers, others rejected them as too controlling. But the conditions served an important purpose. They attracted people who were genuinely interested in improvement, rather than just looking for easy money. My relationship with Nai continued to be the brightest spot in my family life. At 87, she had become something of a technology expert in her senior community, teaching other residents how to video call their families and use tablets to stay connected with the world. "Marcus, you give me more than money," she told me during one of our weekly dinners. "You give me purpose. Teaching computer skills to old people like me, this make me feel useful again." Her words captured something important about wealth that I was still learning. The best use of money wasn't buying things or even solving problems. It was creating opportunities for people to feel valued and capable. This philosophy guided my approach to the nonprofit organization, which had grown beyond my original vision. We now operated in 3 cities, providing not just technology education, but also job training and intergenerational mentorship programs. The work was fulfilling in ways that my old corporate job had never been, and it allowed me to use Eleanor's gift in ways that would have made her proud. 4 years after the inheritance, I finally told Tyler the complete truth about my financial situation. We were hiking in the hills outside Austin, far from any possibility of being overheard, when I decided it was time. "Remember when I told you I'd learned some things about my family?" I began. "The money experiment that went exactly as I predicted," Tyler replied with a grin. "Well, there's more to the story." I took a deep breath. I didn't need their money because I already had money. A lot of money. I explained about Great-Aunt Eleanor's inheritance, my decision to test the family before revealing it, and everything that had happened since. Tyler listened without interruption, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding to something like awe. "Holy shit, Marcus. You've been a millionaire this whole time, and you never said anything?" "Eleanor warned me about how money changes relationships. I needed to know who my real friends were before I told anyone." Tyler was quiet for several minutes as we continued hiking. Finally, he spoke. "You know what? I'm actually glad you didn't tell me earlier. It means our friendship was built on who we are, not what we have. And now that I know, it doesn't change anything about how I see you." His response confirmed what I had hoped, that our friendship was strong enough to survive the truth about my wealth. "Does this mean you're going to start picking up the check at dinner?" Tyler joked. "Actually, yes," I laughed. "I've been feeling guilty about splitting bills with you when I could easily afford to pay." "Well, in that case, I'm thinking we should start dining at much more expensive places." Tyler's ability to joke about the situation while also respecting its seriousness was exactly why he had earned my trust in the first place. 5 years after the inheritance, I received a call that changed my perspective on family relationships once again. Angela was crying, something I had rarely seen from my composed, successful sister. "Marcus, I need to apologize to you," she said through tears. "Robert and I are getting divorced, and going through our finances has made me realize some things about how we've treated you over the years." She explained that the divorce proceedings had forced her to examine their spending patterns and financial priorities. She had discovered that Robert had been hiding significant gambling debts while they were claiming poverty to avoid helping family members. "We had the money to help you when you needed those medical tests," she admitted. "We just chose to spend it on other things. I've been thinking about that choice for months, and I'm ashamed of myself." Angela's apology was genuine and detailed. She acknowledged specific instances where she had chosen convenience over compassion, and she didn't ask for forgiveness or attempt to justify her behavior. I don't expect you to forgive me, she concluded, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did wrong, and I'm sorry. Her call prompted me to reconsider my approach to family relationships. People could change, could recognize their mistakes, could choose to do better. While I wasn't ready to return to the old dynamic of one-sided giving, I was open to rebuilding relationships on more honest foundations. I helped Angela find a good divorce attorney and offered emotional support during her difficult transition. When she asked if I could help with the girls' fall college funds that had been depleted by Robert's gambling, I agreed to contribute, but with the same matching fund requirement I had always maintained. I want to earn back your trust, Angela told me. Tell me what that would look like. It was the first time any family member had asked what I needed from them, rather than telling me what they needed from me. The conversation with Angela led to similar conversations with other family members. Some, like my parents, were defensive and unwilling to examine their own behavior. Others, like Aunt Susan, had always been genuine and just needed financial pressure reduced to show their true caring nature. By the end of my 5th year with the inheritance, I had developed a clearer philosophy about money and relationships. Wealth was a tool that could reveal truth, create opportunities, and solve certain problems. But it couldn't fix fundamental character flaws or create genuine caring where none existed. The family members who had shown their true colors during my experiment remained largely unchanged. Uncle James still prioritized his own comfort over family relationships. Kevin, despite his professional success, continued to look for shortcuts and easy solutions. My parents remained focused on their own struggles and expectations, but other relationships had evolved in positive ways. Angela was working to rebuild trust through consistent actions rather than words. Aunt Susan and I had grown closer as I helped alleviate her financial stress without expecting anything in return. And new relationships, like my friendship with Tyler and my bond with seniors in the community, had flourished because they were built on mutual respect rather than financial utility. As I sat in my comfortable but modest home, reviewing everything that had happened since that Tuesday when Great Aunt Eleanor's lawyer called, I felt profound gratitude. Not just for the money, though financial security was certainly valuable, but for the clarity it had provided. I thought about Eleanor's letter and her hope that I would use the inheritance to build the life I wanted. She had given me more than money. She had given me permission to prioritize my own well-being and choose my relationships carefully. The greatest gift of the inheritance wasn't the ability to buy things or even to help others financially. It was the freedom to be honest about what I would and wouldn't accept in my relationships. I no longer had to tolerate being taken for granted because I was afraid of being alone. I no longer had to enable others' poor choices because I was desperate to be needed. Looking back on the experiment that had started it all, I realized that Tyler had been both right and wrong. He had been right that most of my family wouldn't help when I needed it, but he had been wrong about it destroying me. Instead, it had freed me. The people who deserved to be in my life were the ones who had proven their character when there was nothing to gain from doing so. Nai, who gave from her poverty. Tyler, who valued our friendship regardless of my financial status. Aunt Susan, who regretted not being able to help more than others, regretted being asked. And surprisingly, Angela, who had found the courage to examine her own behavior and commit to doing better. The money had revealed who people truly were, just as Eleanor had predicted. But it had also revealed who I could become when I stopped trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it freely. 6 months ago, I established the Eleanor Chen Foundation, a charitable organization focused on helping young adults who are supporting family members at their own expense. The foundation provides counseling, financial literacy education, and sometimes direct assistance to people caught in cycles of one-sided giving. Our first scholarship recipient was a 24-year-old woman named Maria, who had been supporting her unemployed parents and younger siblings while working 2 jobs and attending community college. When her family learned about the scholarship, they initially tried to convince her to share the money with them. But the foundation's counseling program helped Maria set boundaries and use the opportunity to build her own future while still caring about her family's well-being. Stories like Maria's reminded me why Eleanor's gift had been so valuable. Money without wisdom could be destructive, but money combined with clear thinking about relationships and priorities could transform lives. As I write this, 7 years after receiving the inheritance, I'm preparing for a family reunion that will be different from any we've had before. For the first time, I'm attending as someone who knows exactly where I stand with each family member, what I'm willing to give, and what I expect in return. Some relationships will likely remain distant but cordial. Others have the potential to grow into something more genuine. And a few, like my bond with Nai, will continue to be sources of joy and inspiration. The money is still there, growing in investments and providing monthly income that allows me to live comfortably and give generously. But its greatest value was in the lessons it taught and the freedom it provided to build authentic relationships. If you're reading this and facing similar challenges with family members who take more than they give, I want you to know that you don't need millions of dollars to set boundaries and demand respect. You just need the courage to stop accepting less than you deserve. Great Aunt Eleanor saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. The potential to be generous without being taken advantage of, successful without losing my values, and wealthy without losing my humanity. Her inheritance gave me the tools to become that person. The most important thing I learned is that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who show up when things are difficult, who celebrate your successes without jealousy, and who care about your well-being even when there's nothing in it for them. I'm grateful for the biological family members who have proven themselves worthy of trust and love. But I'm equally grateful for the chosen family I've built. Friends like Tyler, mentors like the seniors I work with, and people like Maria who remind me why breaking cycles of dysfunction matters. Money revealed the truth about my relationships, but it was my choice what to do with that truth. I chose to build a life surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide. That choice, more than any dollar amount, has made me truly wealthy. The experiment I conducted 5 years ago was painful but necessary. It showed me that some people will only care about you when they need something from you. But it also showed me that other people will care about you even when they have nothing to gain from doing so. Those are the people worth keeping in your life. Those are the people worth being wealthy for.